hearing doctors in modern tinnitus now, and they're going to talk a little bit about the data-driven audiology practice and more specifically, some more information about tinnitus and the data that's relevant for that. So I'm going to turn it over to them to do a more formal introduction and get started. And I will keep an eye on, if you have questions or anything, feel free to throw them into the chat. And then we should have a little bit of time at the end of the presentations for questions as well.
Great.
You,
Thank you
Chelsea.
so much, Holly.
Yeah.
I appreciate it. Good. Well, yeah. Like Holly said, I'm Chelsea Treseder. I'm one of the co-founders of My Vitals Pro. This is not going to be a super formal introduction, so sorry to break it to you, Holly. I'm going to keep it short and sweet. But I also have the great pleasure of being joined by Dr. Craig Casper, as Holly mentioned. He is an audiologist and the managing director at New York Hearing Doctors, as well as the CEO and co-founder of Modern Tinnitus. And like Holly said, we were able to present together in Houston at the Linear Forum and really enjoyed it and are very excited to have the opportunity to do so again this evening with you all. So thank you for being here with us. Okay, so real quick, I just wanted to go over what we are going to cover today. So the first thing we're going to talk about is using data, actually big data, to understand what's happening in the audiology and hearing care industry. I'm also going to talk about how you can use both macro and micro data to better understand your individual practice. Craig and I are going to sort of co-present on how you can use data to build moats around your practice. And then Craig's going to finish us off by talking about how you can use data to deliver better clinical outcomes, specifically for tinnitus patients. Why does data and big data specifically matter? If you're an individual private practice owner, just kind of, in your own world, running your clinic, managing your team, taking care of your patients, why does this sort of thing matter to you? And I think, at least one reason is because the private practice audiology landscape is changing. I think any of us in private practice have probably felt that to some degree or another in different ways. And it's changing very rapidly. And I think, the rate of innovation and change certainly to me seems to be kind of increasing. So understanding what those changes are in the industry and doing so in real time rather than kind of retrospectively, I think is very important. And, kind of taking it one step further and not only knowing what industry trends are, but kind of the impact that those trends is having on private practices is critical because, when you know that, it gives you power, it gives you decision-making ability, and it quite frankly gives you a competitive advantage over, the different types of entities that you compete with. So I'm in a bit of a unique position to be able to have access to data like that. So some of you may be familiar with My Vitals Pro, which is the audiology industry's business intelligence platform. But for those of you who aren't familiar with it, I'm going to explain a little bit of it today. But for the purposes of kind of talking about what some of these larger industry trends are that we see, I wanted to kind of explain why I have this data, right? And it's because there are, roughly 1,000 practices now, individual clinic locations that are part of the MVP data set. And because we have data from that many practices, I mean, we're talking millions and millions of rows of data transacting all the time. We're able to kind of see and pull out trends from that data set as they're happening in real time. And, it's really our mission at the core of what we do is to empower private practices to better understand their businesses and the market as a whole so that they can make the right decisions that are going to move private practice forward because we know patients are best cared for in that setting. And so, kind of related to our mission there, because we have access to this data, we like to pull trends out of it and share those back with private practices, again, with the goal of helping them better understand what's happening so they can make decisions that are going to lead them to success. I could spend 2 hours talking about the different trends that we see happening in the data set, but I have some kids to get to a Christmas pageant in an hour. So I'm going to keep it short and I'm going to talk about just 4 today that I think are particularly interesting and important, just to give you a taste of the types of things that we can see in the data and what they mean for private practice owners like yourself. So the first one is probably as a trend itself, not going to shock anyone, and that is the growth in managed care and TPA hearing aid benefits. Medicare Advantage enrollment is growing significantly year over year. And as we all know, that is the main driver of the growth in TPA hearing aid units that we see across the market. So you'll see here on this slide, we're seeing a 7.5% annual growth rate in Medicare Advantage and a 2.1% decline in enrollment in traditional Medicare. The roughly the growth is going to follow at least somewhat to that trend because those Medicare Advantage plans, a good chunk of them, 70% plus, include a hearing aid benefit, whereas we know traditional Medicare does not pay for hearing aids. So one thing I wanted to show here is just the penetration rate by county and how that's changed over time. I think this map gives us a really good, quick visual representation of what we're feeling in our practices. So you can see this is the penetration by county in 2018, and these like light blues and blues are going to be areas of relatively low penetration. The oranges and reds are going to be high penetration. And you can see when I flash forward to 2024, just how much more yellow, orange, and red are on that map. So I'll kind of go back and forth there so you can see it. We, of course, are waiting on the 2025 enrollment data, which we'll have soon, and there'll be lots of cool information coming out of MVP related to that soon. But I think, the long and short of it is there's way higher penetration than there was just a mere 6 years ago, and we're feeling the effects of that in our businesses. So we are seeing 9.3% annual growth rates in private pay units across the MVP data set, and we're seeing 37% growth in TPA units. So, I mean, just a massive difference in what we're seeing here. I want to give a quick caveat that the numbers I'm going to share today, these are coming from the MVP data set, which is fueled by close to 1,000 private practice clinics. So whatever I'm sharing today is not going to match what you see maybe in the hearing review or in other kind of whole industry summaries that you might have access to. Those are going to include data from big box stores, corporate retailers, the VA, things like that. So I'm looking at a pool of practices that are traditional private practices. So these numbers are going to reflect that type of clinic setting. But this massive growth in TPA, I think, has had a number of impacts on clinics. I think a lot of you have probably felt some of these, but it's impacted revenue per hour. I mean, that's something we can see in the data set. It's impacted profitability. We know that for sure. Just anecdotally from talking to hundreds of practice owners over the last couple of years, I think it's had an effect on kind of staff and team satisfaction with their jobs. And I think in some cases, it's impacted our ability to give the patient care and service levels that we want to as premier clinicians and practice owners. So, anytime we run the numbers, which we do all the time in different ways, it takes roughly 3 times the number of TPA patients to equal the revenue and profitability of a private pay patient, which means that you as the owner or clinician or your team as providers are having to work a lot harder for less when it comes to the TPA business. So kind of in summary on this first of the 4 trends I'm going to cover, understanding the impact that the growth in managed care is having on your market and your practice is critical in order to make the right decisions towards TPAs and how to either be successful with them in your practice or fight against them depending on what strategic approach you choose to take. Okay, the second trend that I wanted to cover here is one that may be a little bit less obvious to folks. I mean, again, we all know about TPAs, but the thing I wanted to talk about here is upgrade interval. So this is a KPI we developed and that's available in MVP, and we define upgrade interval as the average amount of time between hearing aid purchases for people in your database. And kind of interestingly, for private pay patients, we are seeing upgrade interval creep up over time. This isn't going to be entirely shocking, I think, to us, even just as consumers. We are seeing this happen in like consumer electronic segments as well. I think the rate of technological innovation has slowed in a lot of segments. So, think about your smartphone, for example. I think a lot of us might go a generation longer before upgrading our smartphone. In 2015, only 6% of iOS and Android users had a phone that was more than 3 years old. And in June of this past year, that number had increased to 33% for iPhones and 22% for Androids. So, it's actually kind of similar. We're seeing cell phone owners wait 4 to 5 years to, purchase new mobile devices, we're seeing the same kind of thing with private pay hearing aids. And I think this is just an important trend to keep an eye on. It's actually going down for TPA, which I think is related to how those benefit plans pay and how often they'll allow for upgrades of hearing aids. Don't the takeaway here isn't like do more TPA, but I do think the takeaway here is understand that there are kind of technology and consumer electronic trends that are affecting hearing aids as well. And, upgrading existing users is typically a pretty important component of any private practices businesses. So knowing that we're kind of, there's a little bit of an uphill battle there, I think is really important. And it's an opportunity to tighten what you're doing on the existing patient side to make sure that you're keeping your upgrade interval sort of in check, as flat or potentially even going down if possible. Okay, the next trend I wanted to mention that we're seeing in the data set has to do with technology levels and ASPs. So, what you'll see in the chart that I have up right now is that we are seeing sizable increases in the percentage of units that are premium and advanced. So, that's a great thing, right? Patients tend to hear better when they're in premium and advanced technology. Those are often where we can generate higher margins. So, this should be good news. We are also seeing increases in ASP, as you'll see here on the blue line that's on top of the purple bars. That is also good news. We have lots of inflationary pressures in the market. I think most private practice owners are experiencing rising costs in terms of payroll, cost of goods, things like that. So we would like to see increases in ASP, and we would also like to see that accompany a shift from, maybe economy and a basic technology up to premium and advanced. Interestingly, though, however, when you look and you isolate premium and advanced ASP, it's basically flat over this roughly 10-year period of time. And so this is where we would not be so happy with this result, right? We would want to see all of these going up and to the right. I have a theory here on why this is happening. I think this is practices using programs to compete with the TPA benefit plans that are out there and having to kind of fight back at those premium and advanced technology levels with lower retail pricing. So kind of the takeaway here is that the ASP gains we're seeing in the market are probably related more to moving business to premium, not actually that we're raising prices, equal for equal. So there's definitely some downward pressure on price, especially at the top tiers. Okay, and the final trend that I thought I would go through here has to do with what we're seeing in regards to age of purchase. So, what we're looking at in this chart is the median age at purchase for first-time purchasers buying private pay hearing aids, and it's been going up lately. I think, this disappointed me when I saw it because I like to, think about marketing for hearing care, and I like to think we've undone some of the stigma by everybody wearing AirPods and things like that, and that all of our efforts we've put in place to attract younger users have been fruitful. And what we're seeing across the data set is that actually so far isn't showing up in the data. Next, we're looking at the median age at purchase for upgrade units only. So these are people who are buying their second set of hearing aids. This is also increasing. So again, or it had kind of dipped, but it's rising back up again. Also, not what we would want to see. And here is just the median age at purchase for all private pay hearing aids, regardless of whether it's a first-time unit or an upgrade unit. And again, we are seeing that creep up. Nobody asked me my opinion, but if you did, I would tell you I have a couple theories on why this is happening. Why are patients waiting longer to treat their hearing loss? I think, one could be that there are, other low cost options out there. So whether it's buying directly from a TPA plan, buying through some kind of online channel, big box stores, even OTC, it might be that patients are treating their hearing loss elsewhere before they end up in a private practice a little bit later. So this is something we're definitely going to keep an eye on. But again, we'd love to see this number going down because we all know how important it is to treat hearing loss. So I think this is going to be an important one to keep an eye on and figure out ways that we can attract younger patients to our practice, which remember that I said that because I'm going to come back to it here a little bit later in the presentation. Okay, so I'm going to segue now to talking about business intelligence. So we're talking about kind of big data and what are the things that we can understand about what's happening in the industry, at large. And that matters. That's important. But what's probably even more important to you is what's happening in your practice. So how can you understand your business? How can you make good decisions? What are your specific strengths, your weaknesses, and your opportunities? And the answer for how you can understand and know all of that is business intelligence. What is BI? I mean, I think everybody's heard the term, but actually, I think it can be a little bit confusing to understand what it is. And that's because it's not actually one thing. So, BI is rather a collection of processes and methods where you gather, transform, and analyze data from various sources, all with the intention of giving an organization the insights they need to make better decisions. So, the BI process is going to include things like data mining, which is where you take databases with large sets of data and use it to uncover trends, kind of like I was just showing you. But of course, you could do that at an individual practice level as well. Reporting, which is then taking that data and making it available to decision makers in an organization so they can draw conclusions and come up with an action plan. KPIs, these are established to better understand what matters in a given business context. So, what matters in an audiology practice is going to be totally different from what matters in a dental practice. And then, of course, once you have a KPI, you need something to help put it in context, and that's where benchmarks come in. And finally, data visualization. So, as you guys probably know from pulling reports out of your office management system and things like that, when you have a data set with hundreds, thousands, millions of rows in our case, those are pretty much impossible to understand on their own. But when you have a well designed data visualization, charts, graphs, things like that, then trends and other important information often make themselves known. So, why is this sort of thing important? I like to think of it like a medical diagnosis. So, if you have a healthcare provider in any specialty area that has a patient complaining of certain symptoms and they don't actually diagnose the root cause of the problem, but instead just start treating symptoms, the patient's not likely to improve as quickly or maybe even at all if the underlying issue that's causing the symptoms isn't addressed. And the same thing's true in an audiology practice. So, for example, if you can tell, just from looking at a widget in your OMS that sales are down, but you don't know why they're down, it's harder to figure out what to do about it. So let's say, you see that your sales are soft and you decide to increase your marketing spend next month in response. If you haven't actually figured out why your sales were soft and maybe it's actually related to a conversion issue in the clinic, then all you've done is waste a bunch of advertising dollars filling the top of your funnel, and you're going to have just as many people leaking out, down the line. On the flip side, however, when we can get an accurate early diagnosis of what's happening in a practice, it's my opinion that almost any problem can be rectified or any opportunity can be captured. And, with large amounts of data, which we all have, even you individually, we can basically measure, manage, and learn almost anything we want from that. So I thought I'd talk for just a second about what BI looks like in the context of an audiology and hearing care practice. Chances are you have goals for your business and you probably also have questions about what's happening and why. And again, in order to answer these types of questions, it can be really challenging because you have to record a bunch of information, you have to gather that information, you have to analyze it, you might have to do some transformation, you might need to pull out data from external sources. To understand truly what's going on. And, the vast majority of private practice owners I know are busy and, they didn't get into this field to pull reports and manipulate them on a daily basis. So the good news is you are sitting on a wealth of information already. If you use an office management system, you don't really have to do anything extra in order to have these insights I'm talking about. The data is there. What you need is a BI tool that's going to take your data along with analytical tools, algorithms, external data sources, and pull that all together in a way that's going to help you answer the questions you have about your business and provide, actionable insights that are going to move the needle and help you move forward. So what does a data-driven audiology practice look like? I think in my opinion, I think a practice that's data-driven would use data to understand their schedule health and future opportunities to drive marketing decisions. You would use data to uncover emerging trends and get ahead of provider issues or other things that might be happening in the clinic. You would use data to make the right strategic decisions about big things like, do you participate with TPAs? Do you add ancillary services like tinnitus treatment and the linear product, and other things like that? I think you should use data to adopt a pricing strategy that's going to be the right one for your market and also for your practice and allow you to achieve your goals. So those are just a handful of things that if you're using data in a BI tool, you're going to be able to do beyond just instinct and use actual data to be able to understand what the right move is for you at that time. So with that, I just want to do a brief introduction on MVP that I've been referencing here. So like I mentioned, MVP is the hearing care industry's business intelligence platform that makes the opportunities in your practice crystal clear. It integrates directly with your office management system, and therefore is able to eliminate any manual work that you or someone on your team might do today to try to understand what's happening in your practice. It has dozens of critical KPIs that are calculated for you at the clinic and or provider level across any time period you like. Features nightly updates that are automatic, so you don't have to do anything. Has forecasting, so you can understand where you're likely to, um, you know, end up for any given metric this month, this year, etc. It gives you kind of high level health checks on what's happening in your business, but at the same time offers detailed and powerful data mining. It offers goal setting and tracking, so the ability to not only set goals that make sense for your clinic with regard to past performance and individual clinics and seasonality and things like that, but also track every single day how you are doing according to those goals. It offers benchmarking. So, because we have close to 1,000 clinics participating with MVP, we're able to show you how you perform relative to your peers, both nationally and regionally. And then also, we can tell you your market share and penetration rate in any market that you operate in or might be considering operating in. So, you can understand kind of where you're already strong and where the opportunities are locally for you to go to grow. MVP also features automated emails so that you're being alerted about things kind of without even having to go to the dashboard. And then it also newly features language-based data interpretation. So for anybody here who's thinking this all sounds great, but I don't know the first thing about KPIs and data analytics, we understand there's a variety of different people who are going to use this tool. There's going to be people who majored in stats in college and are all about looking at numbers and running businesses. And there's going to be audiologists who want to focus on their patients, but know that they need to understand what's happening in their business in order to continue to be successful. So the tool is designed to work for kind of that whole spectrum of users. Okay. So I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Craig and let him talk about a handful of different things here.
Awesome. Thank you, Chelsea. I really appreciate that. I always love listening to Chelsea talk because I have been a kind of a low-key data nerd in recent time, and it's all due to the work that Chelsea and the rest of the team at MVP have been putting out into the world. So they've literally changed the way that I look at my practice, which is such an amazing thing for them to put out into the world. So thank you. It's always hard to follow you also because everything you talk about is so interesting. So I will hope to not disappoint as we go through this right now. Chelsea, I'll have you just kind of click through the slides if you don't
Yeah,
mind as we go
sounds great.
forward here. So quick overview of some of the things that I'd like to cover with you guys. I'd love to first talk about kind of take what Chelsea has started to talk about from the idea of MVP from their perspective, but bringing it into the clinic. I am a practice owner based in New York, and I would really love to talk about the impact of data on the way that I have and continue to run my New York City practice, as well as some of the other projects that we're working on now. Second, I'd like to share this concept that I've been talking about for quite some time about building moats around our business to further differentiate and ultimately strengthen our position, not only in the profession, but also our position in our local communities. And finally, I would like to just briefly touch upon and give you a little bit of an insight of something I've been real passionate about from a clinical perspective for quite some time and introduce all of you to a new way of approaching tinnitus care, which includes a data-driven layer. We can go to the next slide, Chelsea.
Yeah.
So as practice owners, we all face many challenges, and I would dare to say that most of the challenges that we face are pretty much the same. And these pictures I felt really kind of describe what I go through on a day-to-day basis, especially over the past, decade or so with all of the challenges that we faced in New York with, and around the world for that matter, things like COVID, right? How do we kind of come out of these massive challenges to our business? But we feel like we're spinning multiple plates at the same time, and we're trying really hard not to drop them as we go through our day. And we find ourselves having way too many things to manage that we ultimately feel lost. And decision making can be very difficult when we're in a position where we're confused and we're overwhelmed with a lot of the things that we are confronted with, not only as business owners, but also as people who are oftentimes in the clinic dealing with direct patient care. What I have found in the past is that all of us are typically reacting to issues throughout the day versus operating at a much higher level of thought and awareness, where in that stage where we're at a higher level of thought, we're able to be much more proactive in running and growing our businesses. And if you're like me, adding any amount of clarity and sense of control benefits you. Simplifying things, making the complex more clear, definitely simplifies it for us. It benefits us as business owners, but ultimately it benefits our teams as well, because if we're confused, they know we're confused. If we don't have a direction, they know we don't have a direction. So ultimately, gaining more control and clarity over what we're seeing and doing in our business on a day-to-day benefits the business overall. Next slide, Chelsea. So the primary issues that I've faced as a practice owner, and the things that I've been confronted with from a decision-making perspective, is that I had data. I use Cycle in my practice. Some of you might use Counselly or whatever patient management software you use. And as Chelsea said, there's a lot of data in there. And the problem that I face is that there were so many different data points, and pulling information from disparate parts of my universe to tell the story was real complicated at times. And it actually was exhausting for me. And at times I just pushed it away and didn't even want to look at the data because I wasn't sure if what I was looking at was actually telling the full story. And then on top of that, we have our accountants and our bookkeepers and the folks who are on the financial side of our business, that we have metrics from them, but unfortunately things like profit and loss statements and balance sheets and all those types of data points from our accounting team are historical in nature. They're not really giving us a really good understanding or the ability to make high quality decisions in near real time or even look forward necessarily. So I found that to be massively flawed, and I was extremely frustrated with the whole process of doing this. And I've been in practice now for close to 3 decades, in private practice for close to 2. And I thought I was pretty smart and I thought I had a really good handle on things. But when I incorporated the tools that MVP have developed and continue to develop, which is a really important thing, and Chelsea didn't mention this, but they are constantly iterating on their platform to make it better for us as clinicians. And I've seen this happen in real time. But it changed the game for me completely. And now what I felt like when I made that transition, and there is a transition, is, as Chelsea said, most of us don't come out of school having accounting degrees or even understanding what a profit and loss means necessarily, and unless we're self-taught or we've taken some business classes. But once I had the data points from MVP, it allowed me to actually start taking a look at how I was flying the airplane, right? I was behind the dashboard of something that actually provided me with near real-time data. And I was flying it with some level of insight and intelligence versus trying to land the airplane while I was building it in mid-flight. And I always like to joke with a mask over my eyes also because of all the blind spots that I was encountering throughout the course of my day, week, month, and years. We can go to the next slide, Chelsea.
Okay.
So some of the key metrics that I depend on, and again, Chelsea really focused heavily on just kind of high level stuff here, and some of the things from an industry-wide perspective are critical for us, and I know that that's valuable because for me that's massively valuable as a business owner. But the things I look at from my kind of my little microcosm, my day-to-day in New York, my year-over-year gross revenue change, that's a really important metric for me that I look at constantly. Where we're trending, where we are year over year. Growth is important to me. If we're not growing, we are dying, and that's a simple fact. And practice growth, and this is really one of the most important concepts that MVP and the data supports for me, is that when we have practice growth, that leads to the growth of every single person on my team. I have the ability to say with a high level of confidence that we're doing the work that actually supports them in their personal and professional and financial goals and all the things that matter to them. Because ultimately, why would they work for me if I can't support those dreams and goals? Second, hearing aid versus non-hearing aid revenue. This is a critical metric for me because, as we saw in the data earlier, especially everything that's going on with TPAs, we don't take TPAs and we don't do that kind of work in our practice in the city, but in some regions across the country, it is absolutely necessary to compete and to drive patient flow, or even a newer practice that's just getting off the ground. But for me, I found this super important because a good chunk of our practice, as I'll talk about in a few minutes, has nothing to do with hearing aids per se. And we're really interested in seeing the growth of the non-hearing aid side of our practice. And we will show you a couple of examples in a moment of practice. It's really interesting, kind of practices before linear was introduced in 2023 and then after, and what that did to the overall growth year over year. But we have interesting data from a hearing aid versus non-hearing aid perspective as well. Practice goals. This is real critical. Every single person on my team knows that there are goals associated with what we do as a group, and then there's individual KPIs and goals. And this is embedded in the psychology of my team, and they're rewarded. We're all rewarded when goals are met or even exceeded. So it's important to have this dashboard that sits in front of the team on a day to day so they know what they're gaming for every single day. We're really close at this point of the year, and we've only got a few more business days left, but we're really close at achieving and actually exceeding our goal for this year. And we had our team meeting, and for me to present that data and everybody has that, and there's an energy surrounding the information, which is really, really incredible that I never had before when I was guesstimating what we needed to achieve on the year. And then ultimately, Chelsea also mentioned these benchmarks, which is critical. Clearly, they're anonymous. I don't see data from any other practice in the MVP data set. But unless you're part of a buying group, which they might provide you with some understanding of exactly what happens in the industry as a whole, you're going to have very little understanding of how your business stacks up against other practices. And what I've really kind of pulled from the MVP dashboard is how we're doing in comparison to other practices in countless metrics. So it tells me which levers that I need to really kind of focus my energy on to make the business move forward in a way that's beneficial for all the people that are a part of the business. Next slide for me, please. So how do I drive the data? How do I use the data to drive my decisions? At its foundational level, MVP's provided me with, again, here, near real-time metrics to guide this forward thinking, this proactive decision making versus rear view mirror reactive decision making. Really, what I like to say is that what was intuitive before for me, and I think I'm a very intuitive business owner, clinician, entrepreneur, thinker, but intuition doesn't necessarily equate to what's happening in the real world all the time. And now I have the ability to support the thoughts that I have, how I want to grow my business, how I want to build things with data to support it all. And this also served as a foundation for another element of what I'm going to be talking about here in a moment with what we're doing with modern tinnitus. We can go to the next slide here. So one of the key concepts that I focused on that was further supported once I had the data was this concept of business moats. Now, some of you might have heard about this, and it's a relatively popular business term, but the data that I was able to see supported the intuitive elements of me of building certain parts of my practice, where I was trying to build strength around and protection around what we did as a practice. And this effort to kind of build deep and wide moats around the practice was really fueled by the data in many ways, supporting kind of the intuitive sides of things. Now, the next slide, please. The basic definition of a business mode is a key competitive advantage that sets us apart from our competitors, essentially. Next slide. Warren Buffett was the individual who really helped to popularize this concept, saying that the company's moat, or even a lack of a moat, means everything when he decides to invest in it. And if you take a look at what Warren Buffett has achieved over the course of his career with Berkshire Hathaway and all the amazing companies that have been financed, built, and grown under him, I would say this is a person to start to think about listening to. And I do read quite a bit from Buffett and his associate Charlie Munger. But Buffett said the key is not assessing how much an industry is going to affect society or how much it will grow, but rather determining the competitive advantage of any given company and above all, the durability of that advantage. Now, I would encourage all of us to think about how our practices are differentiated in each of our markets, or how our field of audiology is differentiated in terms of what we can offer patients and society from what other parts of professional offerings can, such as physicians, people outside of the audiology community. Now, Charlie Munger, and we can go to the next slide, was Buffett's right-hand man. Some would argue that he was actually the brains behind the operation. And Charlie was known as saying he would rather shoot fish in a barrel after he's drained the barrel. And that's translated to mean that he's always looking for the unfair advantage. We should always be looking for an unfair advantage to build our business. And what I mean by this is nothing that's illegal or immoral, but what is our advantage that our business has that can make our business succeed over other competitors? Now, in such a hyper-competitive world, such as hearing healthcare, and there's a lot of potentially threatening forces that are coming into our world, if we look at it that way. And there's also so much noise. This happens when you're talking all day, and I fear that I cough every time I do these live streams with our friends at Neuromod.
It's okay. That's how everyone knows it's real.
Happening all the time to me, Chelsea. I don't know. So with all this hyper-competitive nature of what's going on in our world and all the noise, again, how are we differentiating our practice to ultimately provide that unfair advantage over our competitors? Now, I view, after almost 3 decades in kind of this game here, I view tinnitus as being one of those unique moats that it's a positive impact not only on the patients that we serve, but also the practices that choose to take it seriously. Now, from the perspective of our practice here in New York City, uh, we've been introducing some really unique service lines throughout the years, things like vestibular neurodiagnostics. We have a rotary chair. We do VEMP. We do VHIT. We do things that most hospitals don't even do in New York City. Um, so that was a moat that we developed over time. And then even expanding our tinnitus moat with the introduction of Linear in March of 2023, which you'll see had a massive impact on our business in New York, as well as our providers and the patients that we serve. And ultimately, the data from that allowed me to make an educated decision of expanding outside of our home office and the headquarters in New York, in Manhattan, to where we now have wonderful relationships in our satellite clinics all around the New York City metropolitan area. So we've had massive practice footprint growth over the past almost 2 years now, simply because the data made sense and because we were able to build this massive moat around our practice, which I would encourage all of you to think about how you can do that in your own respective areas. Next slide here. Almost back to you, Chelsea, here.
Yeah.
Um, so, so why focus on building moats? I think it's pretty obvious here. It's a differentiation factor in your market. It's simply good for your business finances, and it's been critical for survival in many cases. Um, Initially, again, this was a gut reaction, but the data that I've seen from MVP, of all places, has made it very data-driven, and it's supported these gut reactions of how to build business. And now I'm guiding the ship with some real information versus making some just off-the-cuff decisions of how to grow the practice. So I'm going to bounce it back to Chelsea here. I'm going to try to catch myself from coughing too much. And I'm going to let her take a look at some data and show you guys some data about what incorporating high quality tinnitus services, including Linear, what that has done for some practices. And she'll show you some data from the MVP data set here.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Craig. Yeah. So, like Craig said, there are a number of ways to build moats around your practice. You can do it with, one type of addition to your practice or multiple in conjunction with one another, like Craig has done. And again, we love when somebody comes to us with a question like, what is the effect of adding ancillary services or specific ancillary services? What does that do for a practice? Luckily we have the ability to go to the data and ask the question and see if something like that's a good idea or not. So in the case here, we looked specifically at tinnitus. Like Craig mentioned, there are other ancillary services, of course, that audiology and hearing aid practices can add to their portfolio. But again, in the interest of kind of the topic at hand today, we looked specifically at tinnitus. All the metrics that you see here on the screen are per full-time equivalent FTE, which is a metric in MVP, which represents roughly the average production of an individual provider in the data set. And what we did in order to pull this data, was we looked for the presence of certain billing codes, and also we looked for words that had tinnitus or tinnitus related terms in the appointment type or line item. And we've, for the sake of this analysis, defined tinnitus practices as practices that have billed that tinnitus code or had those tinnitus items in their data at least 25 times in the last calendar year. Our thinking there was just, if you got to be doing at least 2 of these types of things a month, more or less, in order to be considered a tinnitus practice. And the non-tinnitus practices would be all other practices in the data set that did not meet that criteria. I think there's a lot of interesting things on this slide, and hopefully, as I've been yammering on here, you've been able to take it in a little bit. But the ones that I wanted to call particular attention to are this revenue per hour number. So what this means is that practices who offer tinnitus services on average have a 22.1% higher revenue per hour than practices who do not. That's amazing, right? I mean, like I said, I think there's all kinds of pressures on revenue per hour that we're facing in our practices, namely related to TPA. So the fact that these practices are generating higher revenue per hour is awesome. Also, if you're going to look at one KPI, I don't recommend only looking at one. I recommend looking at dozens and dozens on a daily basis, which MVP will allow you to do. But if you were going to just look at one, I think revenue per hour is a really important one to look at. It's going to tell you a lot in one number. So I found this to be really interesting and really cool. The other one that I wanted to mention here is physician referrals down here at the bottom, this 25% increase. When you look at 8.1, 6.5, those numbers don't sound that different, but that's actually a 25% increase in physician referrals. Those of us who spend money trying to generate patients into audiology practices, net new patients, know how expensive it is to acquire a new patient and how, generally speaking, awesome a good, reliable physician referral source of new patients is for a practice. So the fact that tinnitus practices are generating on average 25% more physician referrals, I think is really important. The other thing I wanted to mention here is the monthly hearing aid revenue. I think, and even I've been guilty of this in the past, of worrying that by adding ancillary services, regardless of what they might be, that you might distract your time and your team and your resources from what has historically been the greatest revenue and profit generator in most private practices, which is the sale of private pay hearing aids. What this data showed me is that I am dead wrong, and that these practices who are offering tinnitus services are actually generating on average more hearing aid revenue. So what we're seeing here is that your hearing aid business is not compromised by adding tinnitus services. It's actually growing, which is very cool. One thing I'll point out here is just you see a couple things that are red on here, which I think similar to Craig's coughing, at least we're live and we're real. This, I think, helps prove that this data is real, right? Because these make really good sense to me. There are some negatives, if you will, or the decreases when you have tinnitus services in your practice. One is you do fewer TPA units, probably usually a good thing, where you want that to be lower, right? And then second, the conversion rate's lower, which that also makes good sense to me for a couple reasons. One, conversion rate, as it's defined, just kind of generally speaking across MVP, is conversion to hearing aids. We have all kinds of things in the works where we're going to be able to look at conversion related to linear and tinnitus treatment. But so for the sake of this, a conversion to hearing aids, it makes sense to me that this might be a little bit lower in tinnitus practices. One, these people might be converting into linear, not hearing aids, which is also a great thing depending on their clinical needs. And then also, I think we all kind of understand that tinnitus patients can be more complicated than just a traditional hearing loss only patient when it comes to serving them in the practice. So I wanted to just mention why there are a couple red things on here and that they actually make really good sense to me. So overall, my takeaway from this data is that offering tinnitus services is a good idea. So then, and that's kind of the macro level, right? Looking at all the tinnitus services practices in the data set. I also wanted to look at a couple individual practices just to kind of show what the results look like in an individual clinic rather than in aggregate. So these have been anonymized, but this is a practice who, not only offers tinnitus services, but linear specifically. And what you can see here, the purple is the kind of pre-linear time period in the practice, and the teal is the post-linear time period. And you see just exponential growth since the practice started offering linear, 123% growth. And what I think is kind of cool is that, yes, there was an initial pop, of course. I mean, you can really see it, right, from the moment that they started offering linear. But that growth actually remains really steady many, many, many months later, pushing 18 months here when you're looking at this. So I thought this was really cool. And then the second practice case study I was going to show here really shows, a similar trend. This is a much smaller practice, about a third of the size of the practice in case study one, but you're going to see a really similar result and actually even a higher growth percentage. Obviously, higher growth percentages are easier to achieve when you're starting with a smaller number, but really incredible. I mean, we are not seeing practices with 123%, 160% growth that often, in the data set in this period of time. So really, really impressive, and almost impossible to do without adding a location, acquiring a clinic, adding staff, kind of really major changes to your operation. I can't attribute all of this growth to linear necessarily in these practices, but I think it's pretty clear it's had a very dramatic effect. And so the other way we wanted to look at this was to kind of go beyond the individual companies and look at a cohort of practices. For the sake of this analysis, we pulled out practices who'd sold at least 20 linear devices all time from whenever they started selling linear to the day that we pulled this data about a month ago. And so we've blacked out the clinic names on the left, but what you'll see pretty clearly here is that all of these companies have grown since adding linear, which I think is pretty amazing because there's plenty of headwinds to those of us in private practice, whether it's, again, like marketing referral sources not delivering like they used to, having staff leave or go on temporary leave or things like that. So, and undoubtedly, these clinics are facing some of those same headwinds, and they're all growing despite any of those challenges that they're facing. The fact that every single company who sold 20 or more linear devices has grown since they started selling linear, I was just blown away. I thought there was going to be a couple red ones on here, which would maybe make the data more believable, but I swear it's true. We couldn't believe it when we pulled this. It was really, really awesome. So, my takeaway from this is when you add linear to your practice, you will grow, kind of despite any other obstacles that you might be facing in your practice. Okay, one more thing that I wanted to share here in terms of the data, kind of drilling down even to kind of the narrower level, which is what do linear patients themselves look like from a data perspective? How do they differ from our traditional private practice patients, whether those are hearing aid patients or diagnostics or, other services only? So my kind of key takeaways from this slide here are that the revenue per hour is extremely high. So the revenue per hour on linear patients is roughly $1,000. The average revenue per hour across the entire MVP data set is $489. So what this tells me is that working with linear patients is a good use of your time. The other thing I wanted to call attention to specifically here is the age at purchase. So I mentioned early on in my kind of industry overview trends slides that we are seeing average patient age increase of late, which again, I don't think is a trend any of us love. What is really cool about linear patients is they are young. So the average age at purchase of linear in the data set is 61. The average age at purchase of hearing aids in the data set is roughly 75. So these are not the patients that you're currently serving in your practice and selling hearing aids to today. This is a truly organic source of growth, and you're likely not reaching these patients in any of the other ways that you're attempting to bring patients into your practice. So you're making $1,000 an hour and you're making it on patients you wouldn't have seen otherwise, which to me is a huge win. So at this point, I'm going to kind of turn it back over to Craig so he can talk to you a little bit more about his experience in terms of adding tinnitus care to his practice.
Cool. Okay, so just a few more slides here. I think it's obvious that when we take a look at the data that's being pulled from Chelsea and from MVP, that tinnitus provides us with a really unique opportunity at this point. I think a lot of us probably understood this again intuitively, but once we start to see the numbers, it really just shines an amazing light on what the opportunity really is. And I always look at it this way. I heard this many years ago. For a short period of time, I was doing some consulting work in the biotech and medical device world. And in the biotech world, there's a common saying that the folks there want to do good, but they also want to do well. So it's doing good for society, but also being able to build a good business in the process. And I think tinnitus and audiology in general, but tinnitus in particular, gives us that very unique opportunity to do just that. Now, one of the major challenges that we do face, though, is that there's a bottleneck in the world of tinnitus care. There's definitely a limited access to high quality tinnitus providers, and there's a lot of forces at play here that are working to actually raise all ships and bring to the forefront more high quality tinnitus providers. And then there's also this opportunity, if we have the ability to do that, is to actually help more patients. Um, Clearly, the data demonstrates that tinnitus is good business. And as Chelsea said, and I found this particularly in my practice as well as the private practices that we embed ourselves in from a satellite office perspective, is that high quality tinnitus program definitely supports the growth of the overall business, not only from hearing aid perspective, but we see vestibular patients and vice versa, vestibular patients going into tinnitus care as well. So one thing that, and I really appreciate the opportunity to actually use this forum to talk a little bit about something that is, for me, a passion project that's been kind of bubbling for decades at this point. But what if we took the same mindset of a data-driven practice owner and paired that with the data-driven tinnitus clinician? Now, for most of us, when we're treating tinnitus patients, we're sort of limited in terms of the data that we can get from them. We have subjective questionnaire scores, of course, and we have audiograms, and we might even have data points when we're looking at, say, if we're pulling the data logging from Linear, there's some data points there. But what if we had a bigger kind of a microscope to look at some of the data in a very different way? We can go on to the next slide, Chelsea.
Okay.
What if we had, and you can click it one more time, actually.
Perfect. Yep.
What if we had the ability to put sharks in our moat? And this is something I'm always looking at is how do we further differentiate our practice, right? So we can take that data-driven approach to from the business side of our practice as well as the tinnitus patient care side of our practice as well. So the shark, and we can fast forward to the next slide also,
Okay.
is something that I introduced in partnership with Cliff Olson earlier this year. So we technically launched this time last year, but it's a new venture called Modern Tinnitus. And the concept is the data-driven tinnitus clinician. That's why we're so kind of delighted and thrilled to be working with Chelsea and the team at MVP because their mindset is different than anybody else in the field, really. So I'm not going to bore you with the details. I know Chelsea's got much more important things to do with your kids tonight, so I don't want to take up too much time here. But my personal experience with type 1 diabetes has actually led to the concept of this data-driven approach to working with tinnitus patients. And the primary goal of modern tinnitus is to ultimately raise the level of conversation, raise the level of collaboration, and then ultimately raise the clinical competence utilizing a unique data-driven approach to tinnitus care and business. And if we take a look at what a small portion of that is, and we can fast forward to the next slide. So in addition to some of the things that we're going to be offering starting in January, actually, to some of our founding member practices, in addition to the patient education elements and provider education and practice owner education and marketing support, which is so great and important to get patients through our doors to attract, basically convert and deliver, as we're saying. We've created a technology stack that empowers clinicians to make higher quality decisions for their tinnitus patients. And at the core, at the center of that, is what we're calling the Modern Tinnitus Base Camp. And this is definitely the first in the world of tinnitus care. We can fast forward to the next slide there, Chelsea. Excuse me for just one second. I don't know. I blame Neuromod for this because ultimately I don't cough this much during the day, but I feel like I'm talking so much for Neuromod. No, Holly says no. We were doing our streaming sessions and I was great for a period of time and then I was talking so much that my throat was giving out on me. I swear I'm not sick. It's talking so much. So I apologize, guys. I'm sorry if this is distracting. This is not my intention here. So I'll try to make it through the last two slides here without actually losing a lung. Um, so Basecamp, as you can see here, Rachel Cook is our clinician out in Scottsdale, and she's pretty well known. She does a lot of videos for Cliff's channel, and also she's done a lot of great tinnitus videos in recent months. But Basecamp is basically a proprietary platform that allows clinicians to collect relevant biometric data points in near real time. Definitely the first time that this has been applied towards anything like tinnitus in our world. So individual sleep metrics, and this is just a screenshot of what the clinician dashboard looks like. Individual metrics like sleep, and we can break this down between not only quantity of sleep, but also stages of sleep, which are critical when it comes to patients who have tinnitus. We know sleep is a linchpin for our patients. Uh, Things like stress, and we can see peaks of stress that occur throughout the course of somebody's day. We can see activity levels, which we know that exercise is important for our brain, but studies are showing us also that exercise, especially outside, is great from a tinnitus perspective and helping the people who have higher levels of physical activity are less impacted by their tinnitus in many cases. And we can measure things like heart rate and heart rate variability, which is so exciting because heart rate variability is a metric of our autonomic nervous system and ultimately how our systems are able to deal with stress. So now we have a better way to monitor tinnitus related objective metrics in some way. Now, it's not a measure of tinnitus per se, but it's a measure of the things around the tinnitus that we can control. It provides us as clinicians with an opportunity to counsel patients at a much deeper level that's really hasn't been possible until now. It's definitely helping us from a clinical decision-making process, and we've seen this time and time again in our clinic. And it's a very real differentiator. It's a shark in the moat for us, basically, because nobody else is doing this at this point. Uh, so that's what we're looking at. And this is very early stage stuff, although we have some precedent leading up to this, and we've been using these systems now for the past year. So this is where we're at from a clinical data perspective for tinnitus. Now, imagine marrying the business data elements, and we're driving the ship in a way that is more less intuitive and more data driven. And now we have this really interesting beginning of clinical data metrics that will help us drive patient outcomes and better conversations with those patients as well. So that's just a little teaser in terms of what we're up to. I'll pop back now to Chelsea. She'll summarize everything, but hopefully that was interesting for you guys. And again, I'm sorry that I was coughing so much. I hope you were able to get the gist of it through all the coughs.
Oh, yeah. All good here. Thank you so much, Craig. I think what you guys are doing is so exciting and really happy to be on board with you. So yeah, just a quick summary of what we've talked about today, but there are, unfortunately many threats to private practice. But when you have BI and data, you can think better about your practice. You can understand your market, you can understand your individual business, and as Craig has talked about, you can build moats and even put sharks in them. What the data shows us is that tinnitus is a good idea from a business perspective. Obviously, we need to help those people clinically, and the patient care is a no-brainer. So if it's also a good idea from a business perspective, I mean, what a win-win. If you're going to do tinnitus, Linear is the most groundbreaking technology out there with which to offer the best tinnitus care to your patients. And it's easy to see how a moat like high quality tinnitus care powered by a product like Linear helps combat kind of all of those things that I started, an hour ago talking about. Growth in TPA. These are not services and products that people can get through third parties. Lagging upgrade intervals and ASP challenges. This represents a new revenue stream to help counteract those trends that we're seeing in the marketplace. Lowering patient age. I mean, so we talked early on about how it's increasing. Boom, what a beautiful way to bring younger people into your practice, both for tinnitus care and, eventually hearing aids, of course. And then, finally, just kind of working with partners who can help you understand your business, capitalize on opportunities, and maximize both the business and clinical aspects of your patient care is a good idea. So, this is our final slide. I'll leave it up. On the left, I've put a QR code for anyone who'd like to learn more about MVP. This will take you directly to a place where you can schedule a demo. We're going to do something special today. So anybody who schedules a demo from the webinar will send you either an MVP Yeti mug or a coffee gift card, your choice, just to encourage you to take a look if you're interested. And then also on the right-hand side of the screen, we've got a QR code that you can scan if you want to learn more about modern tinnitus and everything that Craig and Cliff are doing to help practices deliver, best in class, never before seen tinnitus care.
Chelsea, thanks. And I just wanted to say thanks to Holly, Eric, Ross, the whole team at Neuromod for inviting us to kind of represent this. We did this in Houston, and it was a great opportunity to collaborate and really share some, I think, interesting angles on practice and tinnitus practice in particular. So thanks to you guys for allowing us to do this again and share this information again.
Thank
Yes, thank
you
you.
for joining us tonight. And do we have any questions out there? It's late. After 6, people get tired. Well, so the team will be reaching out to you guys to see if you have any additional questions. And we are recording this session, so I will be sure to send out a copy of the recording in case you were traveling or on your phone and want to catch some additional information that you weren't able to catch tonight. And I hope everybody has a fantastic holiday and a happy new year. And thanks for joining us tonight. And thank you, Chelsea and Craig.
Thanks, Holly, and thanks everyone for being here. I appreciate it.
Go take
Take
care of
care.
your angels.
Will do.
All right. Take care. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.